Hey everyone, today we are in Oklahoma City at the Rose Hill Burial Park, and we're here to visit the final resting place of George Daniel Miller. And he was an outlaw sometimes and a lawman sometimes, but at one time he was considered the fastest draw in the Old West. And there's a lot of claims of being the fastest draw in the Old West, but I don't think there's any others quite like him. You see, he actually had a hook on one arm and was missing digits on 3 fingers of the other hand. So he's a pretty interesting character in the Old West, and I don't think you're going to see another one like him. If you would like to pay a visit to George's final resting place, that's probably the entrance I would say to come in off of Grand Boulevard, and look for this water tower there. There's also a mausoleum. Just park a little bit in front of there and make your way down this row until you see his marker. And it says Grandfather George D. Miller Sr., 1862 to 1923. Very little is known of George's youth. He was born in Dallas, Texas, and eventually obtained a 3rd grade education. As a teenager, he developed a love for horses, and this led to him leaving home and working in cattle drives that went all across the Indian Territory. A month before his 20th birthday, he joined the Texas Rangers. In 1882, after just 6 months, he was honorably discharged. In 1885, George married Nellie Mae Gibson, and they had 2 children, Edward and George Jr. For some unknown reason, George left his wife and sons in Texas and came to Oklahoma Territory to take up the life of an outlaw. He hooked up with the notorious George Waitman. His nickname was Red Buck, and he got that name from his bright red hair. Waitman was said to be one of the most bloodthirsty outlaws in the territory. He was once part of the Doolin gang, but was kicked out by Bill Doolin himself because Waitman was so ruthless. Numerous crimes were attributed towards him, and some of those involved murder. George Miller was also involved. Eventually, a posse caught up to Miller and Waitman on March 5, 1896. The lawmen called for them to surrender, but Miller drew his gun and started firing at the hidden deputies. One of the lawmen shot Miller in the hand and knocked the weapon from his grasp. Miller then retreated inside the dugout as Waitman was gunned down and killed. Deputy Sheriff Joe Vinchner had been seriously wounded by a slug that had entered his abdomen and exited his back. Then Miller shouted at the lawmen, "Help! I've been shot to pieces!" Reluctantly, they entered the dugout and found Miller's right hand completely mangled. He also had 3 fingers that had damage. That evening, the right hand was amputated and the 3 fingers on his left hand were cropped. Even though Miller was wanted for murder, there is no record of a trial. But what there is a record of is Miller stealing cattle about 8 months later in Texas. He was found guilty and sentenced to prison on June 27, 1897. While in prison, George was fitted with a steel hook. This is when he got the nickname Hookey. After serving 42 months of a 4-year sentence, he was released on December 27, 1900. In 1901, George kind of had a rough year. His brother was killed in a farm accident, and his mother died. And then his wife burned up in a fire. The details of how that happened are not known. But he decided to move to Custer City, Oklahoma, and he worked at the cotton gin that his brother owned. Soon after, Hookey took up being a bartender at the infamous Corner Saloon. His sons were sent to live with their grandparents at this time. The Corner Saloon was in Oklahoma Territory but flourished from business out of the Chickasaw Nation and the Seminole Nation. The saloon is said to be one of the most notorious saloons in Oklahoma history. tons of boozers, misfits, and wanted men. Killings were a common occurrence there. With only a hook on the right hand, bartending was somewhat of a challenge to Hookey. But the hook also came in handy, so to speak, as a weapon. He did master shooting with his hook and limited digits. Miller shot and wounded a man, but was acquitted for lack of evidence. One day, Ed Hendricks, who was a rough and tough Chickasaw man, entered the saloon. He was a frequent visitor and was very obnoxious. Hookey had trouble with Hendricks that day, and both men drew their pistol. Each man shot, but Hendricks missed. Hookey's shot hit Hendricks in the side. Hendricks ran from the saloon. Hookey threw his pistol to the side and grabbed his rifle from underneath the bar. He went to the door where Hendricks fired at Hookey and missed again. Hookey shot twice and killed Hendricks, who was found with 3 bullets in his body. Hookey was arrested and released after paying bond. His murder case was still pending, and he was later arrested again. This time, the bond was increased, but his brother furnished the revised bond. In 1910, Hookey moved to Oklahoma City with his 3 sons. The sons married and started families of their own. For the next several years, the whereabouts of Hookey are unknown. But in 1923, the Tonkawa oil fields opened up, and the booming town of Three Sands sprang up quickly. There was a Kay County Deputy Sheriff, John Two Guns Middleton, who enforced the laws selectively. Neither oil field workers nor Native Americans were his favorite. At this time, Hookey himself became a deputy sheriff in Three Sands, and he was assigned to assist Middleton. John Middleton had a history of arresting and harassing a Choctaw oil field worker named Jackson Burns. Miller was never involved in any of it, but both deputies were walking along Main Street around noon on July 21st, 1923, when a showdown happened. As they passed Wayside Cafe, Middleton spotted Burns at the table. Middleton pointed him out, and Hookey said, "Let's smoke him out." Burns saw the 2 deputies reach for their weapons as they entered. Burns immediately pulled out his pistol and started firing at the lawmen. Hookey went down immediately with 3 slugs to the body. Middleton was hit once, turned, and fled. Burns stepped out the doorway over Hookey and shot Middleton twice more. Middleton fell to the ground. Hookey was en route to the hospital when he spoke his last words. "I'd like to live long enough to take a shot at that yellow Middleton." The next day, Middleton died. George Miller Jr. went and retrieved his father's body. He brought Hookey to Oklahoma City for burial. Burns surrendered himself and claimed self-defense. He was so popular and well-liked that local businessmen and oilmen offered more than $100,000 for his release. Burns was tried for the murder of Middleton, but was found not guilty. The case against Hookey was still pending, but it is thought to have been dropped, as there was no additional evidence, and it failed against Middleton. The irony of it all is that it appears Hookey was never tried for any of the murders in which he had been charged with in Oklahoma. In turn, while a lawman, he was killed in the line of duty by a man who was never tried for his murder. Today, Three Sands is a ghost town. There are only a few foundations and a cemetery that remains. George Miller, otherwise known by his nickname Hookey, is one of the many unique characters of the Old West. I do feel he's been forgotten about over time, but he has one of the stories that would make a great Hollywood movie. Sometimes he was an outlaw, and sometimes he was a lawman. But if you're ever in the Oklahoma City area and you would like to pay him a visit, this is the Rose Hill Burial Park Cemetery. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next time. If you enjoy these old outlaw stories, click on one of the links and watch another one.